can formally proceed.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العظيم. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who has joined us from all over the world. First of all, I must express my gratitude to Ali and the Madinah Institute of Leadership and Entrepreneurship for giving me the opportunity to share some of my views and some of the work that I have been doing for the last 15 years, sitting in one corner of the world, and also some of the methodology that I have developed over a period of years. This is scenario planning probably may not be my bread and butter, but this is very close to my heart. And this is very close to my heart because of two key reasons. The first thing is that this is actually a very, very powerful tool that can take you into the future very, very easily, something that all of us dread and try to avoid real long-term thinking 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now. The second reason for keeping it very close to my heart is that I have had the honor of learning this from the people who invented it. I have been a direct student of Kees van der Heijden, who was actually the part of the core team at Royal Dutch Shell, who developed this whole technique as we see it today. And he was actually a colleague of Pierre Wack, which you can find in the literature all over, and who actually worked with Herman Kahn at that time and developed this whole technique from the World War II. So how do we proceed for this evening for the next 30 to 40 minutes? If you can see on the screen, I'll give you a brief history of scenario planning, how it has developed over a period of years. And the next and the major component of today's talk will be the process, how we actually build scenarios. Mostly this has been drawn from the literature all over the world, but I have modified it to a certain extent for the local audience because I have been a consultant for the National Defense University on scenario planning for military strategy and long-range thinking for the last 5 or 7 years. So this process has evolved. And then last but not the least, the core purpose of this is how to actually use those scenarios to reach a robust strategy. And this is actually the aim of everyone probably sitting around the world, to look at how we can use scenarios from for our actual strategic decisions. And then at the end we will have these question and answers. So this was just a briefing. Now if you can see the screen, this is a long slide. This is basically the history of scenario planning in a short summary. So they started from the World War II. World War II, as you all know, was a long and protracted war, and nobody knew the outcome of this whole war. This was, but at that time there were classically 3 scenarios which the military used. One was called the good scenario, the other one was the bad scenario, the third one probably used to be in the middle, and there were no surprises as such, and this was the thing that was developed and used throughout this World War II. And then if you know the name of this RAND Corporation in the United States, Herman Kahn and his colleagues from the US Air Force, they started working in the 50s on developing scenarios, and they defined scenarios as a hypothetical succession of events with the objective of drawing attention to causal relationships and working towards the decisions. So this was the first definition of the scenarios that was given in the 50s. And then there is a very strong relationship of scenarios with the oil industry, and I will talk about it for a minute or so. Those of us who are familiar with the oil industry at that time would agree with me that in the 50s and 60s, the oil prices remained around $2 a barrel for almost 2 decades. And anybody working with the forecasting techniques would just pick up a paper and pencil and draw a straight line and would predict that for the next 5 years the price is going to stay around $2 a barrel for the next 5 years or 10 years. And then another thing that was also worth mentioning is the carrying vessels or the oil tankers. The oil tankers industry at that time was growing at about 6 to 7% per annum. And again, the prediction was fairly simple that this industry will still go for at the same rate or comparable rate for the next 10 to 20 years. Now, the oil industry and the oil tanker industry at that time, and even still, is a very, very heavy investment-driven industry. And people from the Dutch Shell actually started working with this Herman Kahn, and they were actually not very happy with the unified planning machinery or unified planning mechanism that they were using at Royal Dutch Shell. So they started working towards looking at some of the unusual incidences happening around the world. And they came up and they sort of developed these scenarios at that time, looking at the political happenings all over the world. They looked at Iran, they looked at Middle East, they looked at all the oil producing countries, and they looked at the geopolitical situation and geopolitical developments in the Middle East. And they at that time predicted that the oil prices in the early 70s will shoot beyond $10 a barrel. Now this was a big surprise for everybody, and they, according to some of the authors, they used to laugh at people at Shell that, you know, you're crazy. So, and well, they also thought that we are crazy. But at that time, two major happenings took place in the Middle East. One of them was the Arab-Israel War, and then in 1967, and then the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Now, the team at Royal Dutch Shell could not fairly predict the war, but they actually predicted some happening in the early 70s that will take the prices of the oil to $10 a barrel. So, and that is what exactly happened after the 1973 war. The prices of oil went up to more than $10 a barrel, and this was a major shock for all the companies. Shell at that time was number 7 in the world, and since it had not invested in the either in the oil tankers or in the basic infrastructure of the oil, so they ranked number 2 after this oil crisis, and that was the only company that could survive after this. So this was just a brief history, and then people started believing in scenarios. Initially, there were a lot of skepticism that, you know, scenarios are not good enough for forecasting or taking some strategic decisions. But then from the 75 onwards, a lot of literature developed, and then there is a big network of people all over the world who are working on it, and you can always Google them. There's a global business network, gbn.com, and the others. Okay, so this was just a brief history, and now I'll move on to some of the terminologies that we use for scenarios. The first thing that a scenario planner looks at is the dots on the horizon. Some people also claim that a scenario planner has to have a sense of a clairvoyant, somebody who can actually pick up things from the happenings in the environment. So you can see 3 pictures on the right. The middle one is basically the immigrant, the first convoy of the immigrants crossing the Pak-Afghan border. And anybody sitting or standing on that Afghan border would actually build scenarios around what is happening in this part of the world at the moment, or maybe for the last 10 years or so. And if we look at the top picture, since we cannot have an interactive session here, otherwise I would normally ask. The top picture, there is President Obama sitting, and then the President of Pakistan, and right next to him is a common citizen of Pakistan who is Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. Now, technically he's son of the president, but then he's sitting right next to the president or the most powerful person in the world. So this is again a dot for the people who can think, and at the bottom you can see it's not a very good picture, and but again there are some hard facts that we have to have the courage to look into the eyes, and this is a picture of the Bouazizi who actually burned himself in the Middle East. So these are the kind of dots that a scenario planner picks up to build the story around his or her thesis. So this was the first thing, and then how do we actually do that? Scenarios are primarily linked to the environment in which we live. Normally we take a blank sheet of paper and just write down the horizon year that you can see on the top right corner. It's 2040. And then once we write down 2040, we just close our eyes and look at the model that we use. We call it PESTEL: political, economic, social, technological, ecological, and legal. And we look at the political happenings, we look at the governments, we look at the geopolitical situation in the year 2040. So this is kind of a difficult exercise, but we really have to go and move on and close and open our eyes in that year and see what is happening around. And similarly, we look at the economic situation of the horizon year, and that economic situation primarily looks at the macroeconomics and microeconomic indicators. I will not go into the details of all of them, and because I think we definitely don't have that kind of time. It's a full day exercise. Then we look at the social and the cultural situation in that year. Just to give you an example, and we will have this covered in the next example as well, that there's one thing that is influencing this part of the world is the demographic change. Similarly, look at the technological environment, how the technological environment looks like in that horizon year. And then the green environment, and then the last but not the least, the legal and the judicial system. Now, all of this may sound very, very vague and very, very open, but how do we actually bring it down to something that matters to us? The first thing that we look at is the strengths and weaknesses of the organization or the industry or whatever subject that we are looking at. So because we have to look at the contextual environment, again, the word contextual is very frequently used in the scenario literature. So in order to relate it to the contextual environment, we link PESTEL with the SWOT analysis. We look at the core capabilities, and we also look at the weaknesses which are identifiable and not challengeable. Opportunities and threats can vary from industry to industry, from situation to situation, as you can see. And then at the end of this whole exercise, we are left with about 60 to 70 sort of bullet points that we actually look at. What do? We have a simple exercise to do. We shift all those bullet points on the post-it notes or the magnetic cards, and we just spread them around. And then the entire group would sit around and look at those bullets and try to see some of the, some of the linkages into those bullets. Just a couple of more points that we need to be looking at in terms of scenario methodology. We look at the trends. Now, the trends are the underlying or impacting factors that set the pattern of events. And then the second thing, and the most critical element of this entire scenario exercise, is the drivers. The drivers are the forces that move the plot of the scenario and actually determine the outcome. Let me give you an example. For example, food is a driver. A variety of food is a trend. Clothing is a driver. And a variety of the clothes that we wear is the trend. Similarly, housing is a driver. It's the core force that everybody needs around the world. And then various ways of living, various kind of houses, and the facilities that we live in is basically related to the trends. So again, another example is the security. Security is a driver, and then the various forms of securities that we use would be the trends. And once we have plotted these post-it notes on the on a board, then we look at the clusters or the groups that we form. So once we have those groups and clusters, So this will be the kind of a diagram that we come up with, and this we call the cause and effect diagram. The cause and effect diagram is basically starting from one end and leading to the other end. And we also have to see linkages, the negative and positive impact of one on the other. Normally we have a neutral outcome of this, but we can always have a negative and a positive impact. So out of this diagram, we need to identify the critical elements that we also look at, and then we have some of the assumptions that we make. We make assumptions about the thing that we are looking at. We make assumptions about the horizon year that we are looking at, and then once we have these assumptions, then one of the key elements of the scenario process is to look at the uncertainties. Scenario process is useless if we talk about certainties. Scenario is all about uncertainties. One thing we know about the future is that the future is uncertain. So once we have considered everything, then we sit down in a group and talk about the perceptions that we have of different people around the group that we have. There are two things that we consider very critical in this. There is a lot of discussion in the literature of a remarkable person. Now, somebody would always say everybody is remarkable, yes, but in the scenario methodology, a remarkable person has to have two characteristics. The first one is that he or she is an expert of the area that they're talking about. The second thing is still being an expert, they have to have an eye for the future. So the futuristic thinking and the expertness or the ability to see through things is critical for qualifying for a remarkable person. And then comes the fun part. Once we are all familiar with the x-axis and y-axis, what we do is that we take a simple sheet of paper and plot an x-axis and a y-axis. And we look at the drivers and pick them up. So if we talk about what is happening around Pakistan and this part of the world, since my work on national security revolves around the security of the region, so we picked up two drivers. So one of them is coming from the demographic transition that we are going through. Now, those of you who would like to have some explanation of the demographic transition, so this is basically the entire population is going through a phenomena whereby the number of young adults, the number of youth is actually surpassing the number of the mature and the elderly. So it is predicted that for the next 30 to 40 years, this region will have about 70% of the population under the age of 35 years. Now, if we look at some of the Asian economies, they have grown because of this demographic transition, and this and the positive outcome of this was that they got a demographic dividend, especially if we look at Malaysia and Indonesia. So they actually exploited this demographic transition, and what we see today is because of that demographic dividend. So now if we look at the bottom of this, if we look at the negative element of this is basically a demographic threat. What we see in the part of the world where I live in, the entire thing revolves around the youth who are left clueless of their future and who don't know where to go. A lot of energy, and they're just being exploited. The second thing that that we have identified is the geostrategic location of Pakistan, especially. The geostrategic location of Pakistan is very critical because we are surrounded by five global forces of the world. We are surrounded by India, we have Iran, we have We have China, we have Russia, and then we have US coming over in the middle. So, and we are sitting right in the middle. I always put this point across that if Pakistan was sitting somewhere in Canada or maybe in Africa, nobody would have actually bothered about it. So, but again, there are two ends of it. One is the geostrategic sense making. Do we benefit from the situation that we have, or do we just let it go and let happen what is happening? So these are the four extreme positions that we get from two neutral drivers. So just once again to recap on this, and this is the most critical part of the entire scenario process, where we have to identify the critical drivers. Drivers have to be neutral initially. As you can see, geostrategic maneuvering is neutral, demographic transition is neutral, but then they have two ends. One is demographic dividend, the other one is demographic threat, and then similarly with geostrategic maneuvering, we have geostrategic sense making and we have a geostrategic nonsense. My apologies for this strong word, but we could not find a better word. What do we do afterwards? In words of Herman Kahn, we tell the story backwards. As I said earlier, we go in the year 2040 and look at the environment. Once we have identified the drivers, once we have plotted them on the graph, then we basically talk about the history of the future, how things reached at this stage. So it is something which is close to fiction, yes, but it is also close to uncertainty and reality. And reality is that the future is certain, or in other words, future is uncertain. Now we are looking at a very busy slide here, and if I had some strong connections with the internet, I could actually show this video. I have made a 8-minute video, and those of you who can access YouTube, you can just type in Dr. Awais 2035, and you will see an 8.5-minute video that actually tells you these 4 stories that are given on this slide. So let's look at this these stories briefly. So on the between the 9 o'clock and between the 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock position, we see on the top is called the SU Pakistan, which means basically the super Pakistan. And this is giving a very, very bright future for Pakistan, whereby we're talking about the technological development, and we are talking about the growth of Pakistan, but which is actually coming from the demographic dividend. The argument is that the youth of Pakistan will take charge of this in the future, and there are 2 things that they will be working on, and one of them is the geostrategic sense making. The other one is the demographic dividend. Now this is the only positive scenario that we have at the moment, and if you look at the 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock, at the bottom right corner is called Mohenjo-daro. So Mohenjo-daro is basically again a gloom and doom, and whereby there's a lot of terrorism, and still there are wars going on, and a lot of chaos and uncertainty. Why this is happening? The quadrant is falling between demographic threat and geostrategic sense making. Now the geostrategic sense making here is not for Pakistan, it is for the powers who are actually trying to benefit, or they're actually trying to use this for their own intent and purpose. We move on to the next, which is the demographic threat and the geostrategic nonsense. This is where we see the nuclear war in the 2025, and this part of the region is used for its 2 main strengths. One of them is the youth, the number of people who can actually go to war, and the youth that can go to war. Then second thing is the nuclear power that this region has, that includes India. And if we look at an interesting scenario, this is the between the 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock position, and we call it Riyasats. Now Riyasat is basically a model that is more close to the model in the in the Middle East, that is around Dubai and small states. Now, for some of the Pakistanis, this may not be a very good scenario, but we also have to look at a surprise. Now, if we were sitting in an open session, we would normally ask that, okay, which scenario is giving us the surprise? So in this slide, I can just summarize that. There's the scenario between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock position is where we actually had to put in a lot of effort to think, and this was something that surprised us as well. So the beauty of scenario planning is that it has to have an element of surprise. At least one scenario has to have an element of surprise, and if and this is also a kind of litmus test that if it is not giving us a surprise, then we have to have a question mark about the process and the scenarios that we are coming up with. Okay, now coming to the definition of scenarios. So what are actually scenarios? Scenario is basically a description of plausible future, and there's a lot of scenario terminology which is used very often in the literature, and the word plausible is one of them. If at one extreme we have possible, and if at the other extreme we have impossible, plausible is everything in the middle. So it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be more. Or it can be a set of future events or circumstances that would affect an organization's performance. The second thing that we talk about in terms of scenario definitions is it's all about perceptions. I have shown you 3 pictures. You may or may not take care to even look at them. You may come up with your own pictures. You think about the future in a different way, and I think about future in a different way. The beauty of this process is that it will incorporate everybody's thinking who is part of the process. It will not simply just say yes or no to one view or the other. And then the last but not the least is that these scenarios are for the longer view in a world of great uncertainty. When we work with the telecom companies, they say, okay, how long is long? So for countries and nations, a long would be around 40 years, 50 years. But for a telecom company, for an IT company, for a computer company, so this could actually be 2.5 years, because the entire the technology depletes at a rate of 40% per annum, and in 2.5 years the technology is outdated completely. So when we do it for the technology or fast-moving sectors, we also have to look at these considerations. So scenarios are basically, again, the mental models based on divergent thinkings. If all scenarios are pointing towards one direction, then we don't call them scenarios, because they're just close to the forecast, and they're based on what-if principle. Not, I normally ask these our participants that, okay, what if okay, sorry, can you think this the roof of this room will fall down? Most of them think, okay, no. Well, the question is, we are not looking at a yes or no. We are looking at what if this roof falls down? What if there is a fire? What if there is an accident? What if there is a war, or a disaster, or maybe an earthquake? So are we prepared enough for that? So scenarios actually help us in preparing ourselves. And scenarios are not exact forecasts. They are basically narratives. They are divergent, and they are the hypotheses. And sorry, I'm just flicking through these slides because I think we have talked about it, most of these issues. Scenarios, again, I said in the beginning that they focus on uncertainties and certainties of the future. There's one thing very certain about the future, and that is that the future is uncertain. Okay, so what is the outcome of a typical outcome of scenarios? The first thing is that they will actually strengthen the existing decisions that we have taken. So that was the aha and oho experience. The first thing is the aha. Okay, this is what we have to do, and we'll look at this in the next slides. And then we also look at some of the surprises, some of the things that we never thought about. So that would be the OHO effect. We need to think again. Or maybe if we are just moving ahead, we need to do it more forcefully, because that gives us a lot of confidence on what we are doing. So now coming back to the relationship of these scenarios with the strategic choices that we have. So how do we actually use it in the strategizing process? So if you look at this, again, the whole the scenarios that I showed in the previous slide, now this is the time for making strategic choices for those scenarios. If we believe that those scenarios are correct, those scenarios are plausible, and those scenarios make sense. So there are two things that are coming up from those two scenarios, and one of them is the international diplomacy, and the second thing is the demographic dividend. Now if you look at the 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock quadrant, this is the exploitation quadrant. So this gives us a very strong exploitation strategy there for the next 30 to 40 years. That if we stop doing everything else, we just focus on the international diplomacy and the youth engagement in the technological development, and especially the entrepreneurship, I think the entire country can move towards a very, very progressive state. Now, we look at the other quadrants, quick look at the other quadrants, where we have the not so very healthy situations. What is that giving us? The 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock quadrant is giving us a time to think on our military strategy and the nuclear de-escalation. And then the 6 o'clock and the 9 o'clock scenario is giving us giving us a hint towards more political wisdom and some geostrategic wisdom that we need to be looking at. And again, there are two options, whether we want this 9 o'clock or and the 12 o'clock scenario to happen or not happen. So again, both ways, the answer lies in the youth engagement. So normally, a strategist would argue that I can't go in these 4 strategies. Okay, fine. Now, what scenario do we pick up? Normally, it is the top right quadrant, or we call it the 12 o'clock and 9 o'clock quadrant normally. So we pick up this direction. So this is giving us a direction to move along. So what do we do with the other 3? With the other 3, basically, we pick up points or the situations which can affect us badly, and we need to prepare ourselves against those situations. For example, we need to prepare ourselves against fire. We need to prepare ourselves against war. We need to prepare ourselves against some political mishappening. We need to prepare ourselves if our youth are doing everything that they are doing at the moment, which is very sad, but this is a true fact. So just to summarize again, scenarios help us in setting one direction and protecting ourselves from the possible happenings of the other 3 situations. Then I will not go into the detail of all these forecasting and estimate methods. There are a lot of methods that we can use for the future, and now this is the slide that I would just spend 1 minute on, and here we'll talk about the difference between those forecasting methods and scenarios. So if you look at the first row, so the estimates and forecasts are basically data supplemented by intuition. In terms of the managerial decision making, there's always an argument that you have to have some data to support. Scenarios are actually working in the reverse direction. They are intuitions, and then you have to supplement them by data. Like I showed you in the previous slides, we just had some intuition of the future, and then we sort of linked it backwards to some of the events that are happening around the world. The statistical tools that we use, there are a lot of tools, there's a lot of software that we use for estimates and forecasts, but for scenarios, we have a lot of visioning and reasoning. This is what we call in terms of the qualitative analysis of a situation. And again, the reliance of this estimates and forecast is on the historical data. There has to be some basis for that. And scenarios look at the perceptions of the future. And the time period that we are talking about, estimates and forecasts normally go up to 2 to 5 years. So we normally call them a long-term plan. But scenarios talk about 20 years, 50 years, maybe more. We are talking about changing the societies, bringing change in the generations. So this is where the scenarios have a lot of role to play. Right, so a sigh of relief. We're coming to the last slide, and I'll just summarize it. So scenarios basically are decisions pre-tested against a range of what fate may offer and are likely to stand the test of time, because we have looked at the various ways in which a procedure can go wrong, and this is where the Murphy's law number 6 comes into play, which says that if you have 5 situations in which a procedure can go wrong and you have prepared yourself against all those 5, and then there will be a 6th situation that would come up and for which you're totally unprepared. So scenarios normally help us in reaching or looking at the future from every possible angle, and in order to create some distinctive comparative advantage. And this is basically the ultimate goal of any strategist, to have a robust strategy that we call, which is actually covering everything that is possible within the human domain. And with this, I could not show some of the animations because of the connection. I think it's over to Ali for the question and answers. Thank you very much for patient listening. It's been almost 40 minutes now.
Thank you very much, sir. Quite precisely. I guess you planned it well in advance, as rightly for the topic of scenario planning. Folks, any questions you have, you could put it in the chat box. I'll be happy to read them over, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon on your webinar console. If you raise your hand, I'll be able to give you a chance to speak up. I see there are hands already raised. Let me try to unmute. Yeah, Mr. Tariq Salim, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. There's a little distortion, but yeah.
Okay. My name is Tariq Salim. I'm professor of economics at the American University in Cairo. I teach game theory, and I'm interested in the relationship between scenarios, scenario building, and the algorithm of solutions, basically, using game theory or decision theory or others. The presentation today outlined beautifully how to construct or methods of constructing scenarios, and I think it would be interesting to extend a little bit on solutions or algorithms to come out with solutions for these scenarios, or some kind of cases on these scenarios. It could be qualitative or quantitative, and strategic or quantitative. This is my first question, and my second question is about the dividend and the threat. The 6 and 12 o'clock is very evident, but I'm not sure about the 3 and the 9 o'clock, the nonsense and the sense, of practicality or impracticality. A manager would say we should discard all nonsense or strategic nonsense elements in a scenario building. And what you're saying here, what we are saying here basically is that we should consider this as we should consider even the uncertain, extremely unlikely, or extremely impractical. So I was thinking if there is any implementation of this strategic nonsense that came out as a valid result at the end.
Right. So should I start? Okay. Can I answer this?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we
sorry.
can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I think first of all, thank you very much for this question. This question normally comes up from the people who have these hands-on to this decision making. Actually, the future does two things. One is it makes us nervous, and when we get nervous, we look at something to hang on. And the first thing that a manager would like to hang on is some quantitative evidence for whatever scenario is being presented. So your question is very valid. We definitely look at the quantitative evidence of what we are proposing, but that actually the direction is reverse. We look at the intuition first and then try to back it up with some data. Like the scenario that you see in my slides was drawn from, started from the picture that I showed at the start, and then I had to gather some information, talking to people, trying to get some pieces together. So that was a kind of quantitative, but if you talk about the extrapolative techniques, they don't work in terms of scenarios. And coming to your second question, I think that would take a lot of time to explain, but since you live in that part of the world where probably it's difficult to understand the geostrategic location of Pakistan. So I think this we can definitely take it up in some other session if possible. But we interest of the powers sitting around us, and China has a different power, China has a different interest, Russia has a different interest, India has a different interest, and Iran has a different interest. And because of all these powers, US has a very strong interest in this region. So it's either way, if we are intelligent, we can make use of this interest of all these powers sitting around us, and if we are not that intelligent, so that would end up in the so-called the geostrategic nonsense. And I think this is a very short description of why we have used this, and this is very specific to the situation in Pakistan. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Salim. Let's move to question box. There are questions posted in the chat box. What do you consider the most important factor while assessing scenarios and integrating it with your overall business strategy? Is it looking at coherence, adequacy, or implementation?
That's a very, very interesting question. I think it would be both. But definitely, again, when I talk about the scenario terminology, it gives a very basic description of all these terms. And the first thing that scenarios talk about is making sense. So if it is making sense, whether by coherence or whether by decision making or whether by some logic, so this is valid in terms of scenarios and strategic decision. I think your question is very, very logical. We have to look at the coherence, and we have to look at the implications of the decisions that we are taking today, and the impact of those decisions in the 30 or 40 years to come.
There are a couple of more. Yeah, we have another one. You mentioned surprise. Could you please elaborate what does it mean with the demographic analysis? What sort of analysis should give us a surprise, and in what manner?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think this is a again, very valid question for a scenario planner. A surprise is basically a scenario where the scenario team has to think hard. And then when they think hard, and then they come up with a surprise by themselves. Oh, we never thought about it. To be very honest, we were doing this when we're doing this. If you can recall the 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock situation, we could not figure out that easily. Okay, there is demographic nonsense, and then there is demographic dividend. So what is happening? So what is the outcome? What is the situation like? What is the environment like? And we could not easily come up with a very credible or very sense-making story. So we really took about 2 to 3 days to think and to come up with one story. And so which was, again, there are two things that that lead to surprise. One is that we could not think about it, and the other thing is that we don't want to think about it. So in either case, it is a surprise, or looking at the surprise in the eyes. And yes, staring in the eyes. Okay, yes, this is a sad fact, but I have to admit it. So that is where the surprise comes in, and this is the beauty of this process, that it comes in automatically.
Okay, there's a I think supplementary to the same question. Are you relating surprise to what experts call peripheral vision? Could you please explain or link the both?
Yes, I think you're close. Peripheral vision, something that you have not looked at, something you just forgot to watch. I mean, you forgot to watch something that is not in your direct vision. So I think that's correct. I think peripheral vision, this is a learning for me as well. Yes, peripheral vision, I never thought about it, but yes, it makes sense.
Okay, there's another short one. How would you distinguish between contingency and scenario planning? Are they both same or different?
No, I think, well, thank you very much. I think this is a good question. Contingency, I see contingency, or even the scenario planner would see contingency is against something which is given, which is probably known. For example, fire is given, earthquake is given, a war is given, a food crisis is given, and we have a contingency plan. Rain is given, floods are given. Scenarios are actually looking at things that are not given, that we have not thought about, number one. The second thing is we're talking about the future, for which contingencies, simple contingencies, just may not work. So contingencies are good for the present, but they are definitely not so good for the future, because they would just put us in a very, very comfort zone, and rather I would say put up kind of a non-robust zone, which is very, very dangerous.
We have just one more question.
Right.
What are the
next question? I'll say full stop.
Okay. What are the key vulnerabilities of scenario planning, such as flexibility in operations of business model? Is my model flexible enough to allow us to adapt quickly to a new environment? I think basically the question is about the vulnerability.
No, I think that this is a very good question. This is a very good question. I think a scenario planner would be vulnerable if it misses out. If it misses out some of the obvious signs. If it misses out the dots on the horizon. If it misses out the if it picks up the drivers incorrectly. If you make a mistake in picking up your wrong drivers, then the entire thing would become vulnerable. The second thing that would become vulnerable would be when you have people with fixed ideas in the team, and then somebody may try to influence their thinking and not incorporating the views of everyone, and somebody doing it very quickly. Just, okay, this is my scenario, this is what I think. We have to, that makes a scenario very, very vulnerable if you have not really thought through and talked about and looked at some of the real incidences that could play or that could contribute to the entire plot. Full stop.
Okay, well, that brings us towards the end of the webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Awais, for your time and for sharing your experiences and valuable information with our participants. Thank you all the participants who joined us today. It was really nice to have this interactive webinar. And yes, sir. Thank you very much. And folks, we are recording this webinar and we'll be uploading it on our website, and you all will be intimated with the link.
Sure. Ali?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sure you will give my email and my contact details. So
yeah.
They can, anybody who is willing to contact me directly.
I see there are some people who are posting some extra questions. So we will be sharing the email address of Dr. Awais. So I would appreciate if you could directly ask him via email, or we can continue it. Or even on the blog, once it's uploaded, you could put your comments and questions for him to further answer. But once again, thank you very much, Dr. Awais. And folks, we are having another webinar on the 25th with Dr. Carol Kuhl of INSEAD Business School. He will be talking about the leadership in the ecosystems. So you could find out more details by visiting www.mile.org. And with that, I would like to end this webinar with a note of thanks to Dr. Awais once again.